This was the first game I ever played. There was a machine just like it at the local pizza place. Man, it's still great. Pac-Man, not the pizza. But there was one version of this game that wasn't so hot. In fact, it was so bad that it nearly killed off video games for good. Rewind to 1980. Namco and Midway's Pac-Man is eating up most of the arcade business and cutting into Atari's bottom line. The company had a new president, Ray Kassar, who was a marketing pro. Looking for a new revenue stream, he set his sights on American homes and getting the 2600 console into more of them. Marketing 101. People buy what they know, and people know these guys. Space Invaders had kicked Atari's butt in the arcades back in 1978. Now Kassar thought they were the ones who could save it. In the best can't beat 'em, join 'em tradition, he went straight to Taito, the original Japanese company that had designed the game, and bought the rights to a home version of Space Invaders. When it hit stores, 2600 sales skyrocketed. Kassar wanted more.
We were asked to do home versions of popular arcade titles. It's a very difficult task because the Atari 2600 is a very simple game system electronically, whereas an arcade game had $4,000 worth of technology in it.
Faster than you could say asteroids, more Atari arcade knockoffs hit store shelves. Atari soon had a reputation as a profitable company and a great place to work, but only if you were in upper management.
The culture changed at Atari when Bushnell was forced out and the new management came in. They didn't understand the industry. They didn't understand consumer electronics. They didn't understand technology. They had little respect for the creative work that was being done by game designers such as myself.
These engineers would create a software program that would result in $20, $30 million in sales. And they were making this little paltry salary, and they figured, gee, I'd like to get a penny or two or three per each cartridge.
So we go to the president of Atari and point that out, and he said to us, and I'll quote, he said, "You are no more important to that game than the person on the assembly line who puts it together." That didn't sit too well with us.
Contempt breeds competition. So 4 of Atari's top game designers gave Kassar the kiss-off and started their own company.
Be blasted right out of your senses. Star Master by Activision.
The most significant thing about Activision was that it was the first independent video game publisher. Prior to our formation, all game software was created by the hardware manufacturers.
One of the differences with Activision was we promoted the game creator as an author. If you're creative at what you do, you kind of like some recognition from the public.
Activision was a huge success. We grew from 0 in revenue to $160 million in revenue in 3 years.
Their first hits included Pitfall, Kaboom, and Freeway.
I came up with Freeway on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, which is 10 lanes of traffic. Looked out the window and there was this idiot trying to cross the street. And I'm looking at that and I said, that'd make a good video game.
Atari wasn't the only game in town anymore. More companies were making more consoles. Activision was making games for all of them. Magnavox had the Odyssey 2. Famous toy maker Mattel had Intellivision. Mattel's ads for their console featured intellectual literary figure George Plimpton.
I've been comparing the exciting new Intellivision space game Star Strike with one of the most popular Atari games, Asteroid.
Guess they figured most Americans had to be dragged away from reading War and Peace to play video games.
Star Strike features our most exciting visual effect, total destruction of a planet, which is why, after Star Strike, Asteroids left me rather flat. Total destruction of a planet.
Then another unlikely player showed up on the field, a plastic pool maker called Coleco.
We had looked at this whole arcade position and believed that electronics, as it related to kids, was going to be a very, very important angle. So we started to work on a number of different products that used electronic chips as their heart.
And I'm an electronic quarterback. I start in the backfield and follow my blockers.
Blockers? I don't have any blockers.
Coleco's electronic quarterback.
We did the head-to-head series of dedicated games where you played against an opponent on the other side of the game.
Now we can play at the same time. I'm offense. I'm defense.
With head-to-head, you're really in the game. A power sweep. You pass. He blitzes. Intercepts.
This is real competition.
Then we did the miniature tabletop arcade games, which were miniature versions of Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. They looked exactly like the arcade games.
They were very successful, and that put Coleco on the road to developing more video and electronic games.
And a new console called ColecoVision was born.
ColecoVision was an attempt to try and replicate as closely as possible in those days the actual experience of the arcade.
Knowing they needed a hot game to kick off their console sales, they set their sights on the arcade hit, Donkey Kong, and bought themselves a 6-month exclusive to the game from Nintendo. ColecoVision became the smash hit of 1982.
Donkey Kong was the driver. We impacted it with the unit. What, ColecoVision, you got a Donkey Kong cartridge.
Suddenly, another 800-pound gorilla came into the room, Universal Studios. They claimed that Nintendo's Donkey Kong violated their copyright on the movie King Kong, and they wanted their piece of the action.
It's a great court case. They actually at one point brought in a Donkey Kong machine and played the game for the judge in the middle of the court, which was quite a scene.
But the biggest laugh came when court papers, prepared by Universal's own lawyers, revealed that the original copyright holder had let the rights fall into the public domain.
So in the end, not only did they lose, they had to pay damages and court expenses.
Hate to say it, but we got it. Nintendo made a monkey out of Universal. And what about those monkeys who were running Atari?
They were affected by waves of people leaving the company. First Activision, then there was another wave after us. And so they lost their very best programmers.
Desperate, Atari licensed the arcade classic Pac-Man and ordered 12 million cartridges. It sucked.
It flickered. It didn't look like Pac-Man. It didn't play well. It was hard to control. It was ugly. It was an awful game.
And a financial disaster. Big time. Steve Ross, chief of Atari's corporate parent, Warner Communications, decided to step in, and he brought one of Hollywood's biggest talents along with him, Steven Spielberg. In the summer of 1982, E.T. was burning up the box office, and Ross wanted to ride that bike too. He paid a cool $25 million for the right to use Steve's extraterrestrial in a new video game, and he promised to have it out by Christmas.
I think they had to develop the game in 8 weeks instead of 9 months. It's kind of hard to make a game be really fun and have a lot of depth in it in a period of 8 weeks.
And it was so bad. The ones that they sold, most of them were returned.
In '83, Atari sent diesel trucks into the New Mexico desert packed with unsold cartridges, and they buried them.
The legend was they had to run in and pour concrete over them to make them really go away. Ugly, ugly. It basically killed Atari. It was the end of Atari.
By early 1983, it looked like the home gaming boom was going bust. For everyone.
30 companies got a couple $1 million in venture capital, hired a couple programmers off the street who'd never designed video games, and developed a video game and tried to sell it, and nobody was buying because it was a piece of garbage. It was ironic because when we saw those 30 new companies, we looked at each other and said, none of these guys are going to be in business a year from now. And we didn't take that one step further and say, and my God, what that's going to do to the business.
In the next 2 years, Warner Communications dumped Atari and got out of the industry. Mattel shut down production of their Intellivision system. Coleco sales dropped through the floor. And in 1985, just as everything really hit bottom, Nintendo stood up and said they weren't going to take it anymore and launched their own gaming console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. Everyone thought they were crazy.
All of a sudden, Nintendo came in, better graphics, better color, better sound. Boom, rock and roll, total success.
Nintendo has the most video game hits, like baseball and Excite Bike. Now you're playing with power.
They really brought in a new age of video games with the simple introduction of the NES system. They rethought everything. They said, you know, the way cartridges loaded, the way the controllers are designed. So let's start over and create a really friendly game system for families to enjoy.
And who was leading the Nintendo NES charge? Their Donkey Kong hero, Mario, now starring in Super Mario Brothers.
They came out with Super Mario Brothers, which was a great game. So far beyond anything that had existed before in the home. It made side-scrolling vivid, and it gave you puzzles, hidden puzzles and fun puzzles. It characterized what games could be. And it was a phenomenon all over again.
Once that happened, it really changed the business because then Sega started looking at the business more seriously.
Sega was short for Service Games. It had actually gotten its start as an American company that imported pinball machines to military bases in Japan after World War II. But by 1986, Sega was a Japanese company toiling away in the arcade business. Seeing Nintendo's success, they came out with their first console, the Sega Master System. Most of their games were repackaged arcade titles and couldn't compete with the exciting originals that Nintendo was cranking out. It would take another 5 years before Sega would get a real shot at pushing Nintendo and Mario off their high ladder.
The Japanese really took over the video game industry because we have these games that anyone could play, anyone could understand, and everyone loves. You know, and they're very simple, they're very easy to get into. And the hardware is more powerful than anything we've seen from the American side. So these guys, they were able to bring back video games, like they brought it back from the dead.
After a 5-year slump, consoles were clawing their way back into homes, only to meet a new challenger, the personal computer. We can barely remember life without them, but in the early 80s, these machines were the hot new thing. And they were about to take video game play to a higher level, create new competition for gaming dollars, and give game designers a new opportunity to take even more power into their own hands.